Tonight's inaugural Critical Conversations series has been brought on by a need for uncensored critical dialogue in our region. Critical Conversations seeks to spark revolution in the St. Louis art world by aiming to strengthen vital connections between individuals, institutions, spaces, and creative communities. By setting the stage for profound criticism and discussion on a wide range of topics, we hope to inspire action through increased understanding, agency, and accountability among creatives, administrators, academics, and critics. The moderator for tonight's conversation is Ms. Susan Colangelo. Susan is a project artist who works in a variety of media, including photography, videography, and stitching. Through her work with public schools, she has led arts-based workshops focused on cultural awareness, inclusiveness, respect, and literacy. She specializes in large community school university projects that use the arts to connect and build understanding between various groups of people in new ways. Her most recent projects include The Why of Tilly's Corner and the St. Louis Storybook Photo Booth. Susan has served as an adjunct lecturer at Washington University in St. Louis and is a 9 Network community producer. She is founding chair and president of the St. Louis Story Stitchers Artist Collective, a 501c3 based at Kranzberg Art Center, where professional artists work alongside inner-city teens to promote understanding, civic pride, and literacy through spoken word, rap, photography, and videography. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Susan Colangelo.
Okay, I think we're all on. Thank you, BJ, very much. And thank you to the Board of Critical Mass for having us here today. We have a wonderful panel, and we're going to be talking about socially engaged art or social practice in the arts. So the structure for tonight is that I'm going to be introducing the panelists by telling you a little biography that they sent to us upon request. Then I'm going to give you a brief overview, a little bit of history of the field of social practice in art. We're talking about visual art because that's the focus of Critical Mass. Then we'll hear from each one of our panelists, and then we'll open for questions and discussion. Okay, so first up, oops, it's not me, there, is Chrisine Ilewski. Did I say that right? After a personal loss to gun violence, Chrisine Ilewski started the Faces Project, painting the portraits of children 20 and under who have died as a result of gun violence. Organizing with other artists, a board was formed, and thanks in part to a 2013 Critical Mass Creative Stimulus Grant, artists continue the work of Faces Not Forgotten, speaking directly to the wishes of the families that their children not be forgotten. Artists paint a portrait, the face of each child, which is framed and donated to the family. An acrylic transfer of that image is used to collage the faces on vintage handkerchiefs mounted on black canvas. Faces Not Forgotten works with the St. Louis Crime Victims Advocacy Center to respectfully contact victims' families for their permission to use these portraits in the fight against gun violence. Artists have exhibited at the Vaughn Cultural Center, the Foundry, University of Missouri St. Louis, Soulard Art Market, the Maryland Heights Community Center, the Regional Art Center, and the Christ Church Cathedral. Stefani Weedon-Smith brings to the National Conference for Community and Justice extensive professional experience in art, galleries, and museums, hospitals, and community-based youth programs. Maybe you can raise your hand when I get to you. She earned her master's in professional studies from Pratt Institute in Creative Arts Therapy and Creative Development in 2001, and her BSBA in Business Administration in 1993 from Rockhurst University. Stefani returned home to St. Louis in 2009 and has worked to empower young people to change their community using the arts. She created the young women's group Girls Taking Over at the Spot Youth Center, a program focusing on young women navigating sexism and racism. Stefani also completed a project for young people to find their voice in University City, lending a platform to gain skills in art, civic engagement, advocacy, and research skills, leading to the creation of a youth commission. Stefani is a core faculty member for the Regional Arts Commission's Community Arts Training Institute. She's also a 2009 alum. This intensive program brings together artists, social workers, educators, community and social activists, and policymakers to provide skills on how to collaborate for community impact. Marcus Curtis, I guess you can guess which one he is since he's the only guy up there. Marcus Curtis is an artist, carpenter, and facilitator. He is one half of Citizen Carpentry, a duo dedicated to facilitating skill-sharing opportunities and creating platforms for social crafting related to education, transit, and sustainability. For the last 18 months, Marcus has been working with the Pink House in Pagedale, Missouri, to co-create community-driven projects including outdoor chess tables and unique chess sets for the students that gather after school. He is also co-founder of Human Current, a design studio based out of South City, St. Louis, which strives to create affordable, human-centered design solutions to improve people's lives and bring elements of wonder into their days. Since August 9, 2014, Marcus has been invited on numerous occasions to collaborate with artists and activists in protest actions and creative civil disobedience. He designed and built the mirrored casket along with a team of artists and activists who helped conceive the idea. The Mirrored Casket Project is a collaborative sculpture created by local community artists in St. Louis. Shaped like a closed coffin, the mirrored casket is made of mirrors to challenge onlookers to question, empathize, and reflect on their own roles in remediating the crisis of countless deaths that young men of color experience in the United States at the hand of police and community violence. Frida L Wheaton is a Renaissance woman, political activist, educator, lawyer, poet, photographer, arts advocate, gallery owner, and curator. Her strong Mississippi cultural heritage and a Tougaloo college education primed her for the future. Her Washington University School of Law education gave her the ultimate tools to address life's opportunities and challenges. Freida was active in the St. Louis arts community before her retirement from a 30-year career as an in-house counsel. Now she channels her energies into all things arts and culture, including creating mixed media collage and assemblage works of art. In August 2013, Freida convened the principals of 8 Black art galleries, including her own Salon 53, under an umbrella of collaboration and shared purpose. The Alliance of Black Art Galleries emerged as a consummate collaborative vehicle for art exhibitions and projects. Following the August 9, 2014 death of young Michael Brown at the hands of a Ferguson police officer, Freida answered a new calling. She conceived and curated the acclaimed exhibition, Hands Up, Don't Shoot, Artists Respond. It was a 100-plus artist exhibition at 14 venues in St. Louis City and County. It is a visual, artistic response to an injustice that has now become a movement. And we're going to hear back from our panelists, each one in a little bit. Oh, I forgot I have to do this. It's not working. Oops, now it's working too much. Okay, so we're going to look at what is socially engaged art or social practice in art. It's interchangeable. And, oh, my notes are gone. Oh, okay, wait a second. There we go. So, would you mind clicking this whenever I click my thing? Yeah, okay. That's easier, okay. So when we think about socially engaged art, I want you to think of building blocks, like wooden blocks that you had when you were a child, that are piled up one on top of the other to create a base for the work that social practice artists are doing today. And then when you think of those blocks, let's put names and labels on the front of them. So the blocks are a part of history. They relate to events in history or social movements and artistic movements. When we think about social movements, really we think that about a reaction to problems in human society like violence, human rights violations or corruption, or illness like the AIDS movement. So the first one listed here is 1889. The Whole House was founded in Chicago by social worker Jane Addams. And that's the other thing that we can add is social work. Stefani is trained as an art therapist. Jane Addams enjoyed using arts, crafts, music, dance, theater, and started the settlement house movement, which we can still see in St. Louis today in the Pink House that's in Pagedale, where Marcis has been working. So we can also add social work to some of those blocks. The other thing we're going to add, and as these interweave together to create the base of our work, is movements in art history. And I'm going to try to show you in 10 minutes how that all comes together. So here you see the AIDS quilt. So the first movement we're going to talk about is Dada, and that's because our work is based on conceptual art. So Dada began in 1916 in Switzerland and spread to Berlin and Paris, and it grew out of a reaction to the horror of World War I. In the 1900s, there was a desire to merge art and life throughout the avant-garde movements in art. So Dada was a celebration of anti-art. It was criticizing dominant culture by making fun of everything. Abstract art, sound poetry, spoken word, performance art all grew out of Dada. Marcel Duchamp, Paul Klee, Jean Arp were some of the Dada artists. Kurt Schwitters was one, and this is for you, Marcus. He said, "We members of the Dada movement merely hold up a mirror to the times." Conceptual art is pretty much, I think, started by Marcel Duchamp with this urinal piece that he called Fountain. So he took a urinal and he put it in a gallery and he called it art. That was 1917, and that was kind of the start of conceptual art. So he said the creative act is not performed by the artist alone, and that was new. That was new, and that's something that we as socially engaged artists depend on. The creative act is not performed by the artist alone. So the viewer is then bringing something to the artwork in the gallery before it's actually a completed work of art, and that was a new idea. And then if we look at the United States in the 30s, we have the Depression and the Works Project Administration, created by President Roosevelt, funded by Congress. It's important to socially engaged art because it was the time when the federal government in the United States funded community artists to create public works of art in communities where we live. This one is in St. Louis. Somewhere it's called Cycle on History of Region, 1942. So there was artists, musicians, actors, directors, writers, and large-scale art projects, and it also funded 100+ community art centers. Then we're going to jump to the 60s, and we're going to think about social movements in the 60s. So what was happening, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights era. This led to a greater social engagement in art and emergence of performance and installation art. This art centered on process and site specificity. One of the big things that happened was in 1957, Alan Capro, a performance artist and a student of John Cage, coined the term happening. So suddenly, visual artists are getting involved in performance art. A happening could take place anywhere. It's performance-based. It's meant to be seen as art. And one of the key elements is that it's planned by an artist. And that still is probably important, I would say, to socially engaged artists today. Happenings eliminate the boundary between artwork and viewer. So the idea of audience is going to start to become important, as you just saw a little bit with Marcel Duchamp. This is a quote from Yoko Ono. "In the 60s, we fought for peace when the Vietnam War was on. We were against the cops and against the politicians, and there was a lot of waving banners and all that. And I think in a way, just as they were enjoying the machoism of war, we were enjoying the machoism of being anti-war, you know?" And here you see her piece up here is in Carnegie Recital Hall. It was the symphony was playing, and then she bound them all with gauze until they couldn't play anymore, and they became one body, and they all stood up and left the room. It was a happening. Then we have Joseph Beuys in the 60s. So Joseph Beuys bumped it up a little bit more, and said that the artist has a participatory role in shaping society and politics. He said the artist is a sculptor who creates structures in society using language, thought, action, and object to bring about change. So that is moving us closer to what we consider socially engaged art today. And he was the first one that said that. The concept that art can transform society was new. Joseph Beuys says every man is an artist. Participatory art requires action on the part of the viewer to complete the work. So it's moving beyond Duchamp, remember, where the viewer looking at the art and bringing his ideas completes the work. Now, Beuys is demanding that we actually get up out of our chairs. So in this piece, this is 7,000 stones that he brought to Documenta, and he placed them in the form of an arrow. And there's a tree, which is hard to see, that's vertical at the point of the arrow that he planted. And then he announced that the stones should not be moved unless an oak tree was planted in the new location of each stone. And 7,000 oak trees were planted as the stones were moved, and they still exist there today. And then also in the 60s, of course, we think of the civil rights movement, photography and videography spreading across the world through television. No internet yet. Altered the progression of the civil rights movement. We come to the 70s and the women's movement. Remember, we're building our blocks and intertwining them. Suzanne Lacey, one of the leaders in our field, looked at violence against women through a series of artworks, and this is an early one. 3 Weeks in May exposed the extent of reported rapes in LA during a 3-week performance in 1977. So she has moved performance art, conversation as a medium into the field, and still is very vibrant and working today. Meryl Lauderman Euclid, she addresses waste, urban maintenance, and recycling, and this was in 1978. This is her ritual handshake with a New York City sanitation worker. She was invited to become artist in residence at the New York Department of Sanitation. I think she still is that. This led to the work Touch Sanitation, which over the course of 11 months, she shook hands with 8,500 sanitation workers and thanked them for keeping New York City alive. She says, I know their anger, I have their anger. The feminist movement missed an opportunity to build a coalition between women who are the ancient maintenance class and the sanitation workers. That would be most people in the world. We could really change things. Now we're thinking about social enterprise. So that was kind of land as catalyst. This is social enterprise, which is getting to where we're going now with the field. So this is a photograph of Gordon Matta Clark, and you might remember a couple years back that the Pulitzer Arts Foundation showed Gordon Matta Clark show. So that was the building cuts where it looked like he sliced through a building and it was placed in the museum. But here he's founded and ran Food, an artist restaurant and event space in Soho when Soho was still bohemian. So the early 70s with his wife Carol Gooden. And you can see he's got his video camera there. And last week I was at Open Engagement, which is a national conference for socially engaged artists. And this was one of the featured pieces. This is John Rubin, who's a professor at Carnegie Mellon. And he has a kiosk in Schenley Park, if you know Pittsburgh, between University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University, called Conflict Kitchen. Conflict Kitchen only serves food from countries with which the United States is in conflict. So you go there. Right now it's Palestinian. So the whole kiosk is painted. They painstakingly study any country that they do. So the kiosk is painted with beautiful patterns from Palestinian culture. You get your food, which has been researched and designed by chefs that's authentically Palestinian. And then you get some reading material, which I'll pass this around, to read while you eat. And this is interviews that they've done on web cam while you're at Conflict Kitchen, and then they've printed the interviews. So they interview people in Palestine or in the diaspora who are Palestinian. And you can talk to someone in Palestine through an avatar and a webcam while you're there, if you're lucky. The food was really good. So this conflict kitchen, this little kiosk, I'm putting it with Gordon Maddox Clark's food because this is pulling in $1 million a year. No kidding. And his idea is that looking forward in our field, we should try to find the everyday to raise money and stop being dependent on patrons and grants, because that gives us freedom of speech and freedom from politics. Now I'm going to end with the keynote speaker from that open engagement conference, who was Rick Lowe. Rick Lowe is also one of the leaders in our field. Last year he won a MacArthur Fellowship. He started Project Row Houses in Houston, Texas, which is a community-based community-based arts and culture nonprofit. It's in the oldest African American district in the city. He started it by buying a row of row houses, and so the row goes like this, and then there's a green space in the middle, and there's another row behind it. Now he has arts education. He has high art in the galleries. He has theater, I think a kitchen. He has also bringing in social work homes that are dedicated to young mothers who are getting their education. And on their website it says that Project Row Houses shifts the view of art from traditional studio practice to a more conceptual base of transforming the social environment. So what I'm going to do is, to close, is give you some of my notes from his lecture, because he was the final keynote, and I think it's just interesting to hear what he was thinking and telling us. So he's talking to a group of people from across the nation that are doing this work. The task of socially engaged art is to bring into focus social and community actions that we have lost the capacity to take in, he said. Artists can help people focus on things that they can't ordinarily see. He said it's important to claim the work in its rightful context in the field of art. He told us that's because art is where the money is, and art is where the criticism happens, and art is where the archiving happens. He said in the socially engaged art, the art-making parts and the organizing parts, such as fundraising and conceptualization, have a tendency towards deception, that we should be aware of our own privilege and try not to rely on patronage. That came up a lot at the conference. To work to empower the community or share in the empowering process, and to respect those who live where we are working. This is interesting because the National Endowment for the Arts, I was just looking on their website today as I was preparing for this, so creative placemaking is still very much a part of their language. $50,000 to $250,000 grants this year for design-based creative placemaking. But he says, no, learn how to see a place instead of making a place. Learn how to see a place instead of making a place. Instead of creating creative placemaking, which proposes giving a place value, rather think about place keeping, or how do you look at things deeply, find the value that's there, and build on what's there. And he ended with revolution, and critical mass is asking us to start a revolution through these conversations. So this is what Rick Lowe says on revolution. It's something that is always happening. It's a sustained movement of empowering the powerless. He said that over and over. Our work is relevant to that. Social change does not mean social justice. Justice is at the center of what we should be talking about. My work is art, he said. It's not about making a place, but about acknowledging a place is there. When can we claim that the work is really about justice? Revolution is a sustained empowerment of people who are powerless. And that's all I have. So now I'm going to call Christine up, and we're going to have each panelist present, and then we're going to have lots of discussion.
Can you hear me? Or not? Can you hear me now? Okay. My name is Chrisine Ilewski, and I'm the founder of the Faces Not Forgotten project. This is a portrait of Ramel, which was done by Angela Wabi. I began the project. Well, first, let me talk a minute about shootings. So, children die by gun violence every day. There are shootings every day. We hear them in the news. There was one today that I heard of a young man who sat next to my daughter in college this entire semester. There were 2 young women yesterday found in a empty lot, and 2 young women the day before found next to their sleeping babies. So we hear these stories, and then we hear the numbers. Let me give you a few numbers. So for every soldier killed in Afghanistan, there have been 13 children killed in the United States by gun violence. There are 7 children killed on average every day by gun violence. And between the years of 2002 and 2012, there were 28,000 children, 19 and under, killed by gun violence. 2/3 of those are teenagers, 15 to 19 years of age, and primarily African American. Those are numbers, and we live with those numbers. We get upset when we hear about each story. Maybe we hear a voice, maybe we hear a name, we might see a picture, but do we remember? Do we remember the name of each child? Do we remember a face? I was upset. Every time I hear one, I'm upset. But I was overwhelmed by it, and I would go on with my life, and what could I do about it as an artist? And then I had a personal experience about 6 years ago where I lost a friend who was not a child, a 75-year-old priest who stood for everything, stood for nonviolence. He was a pacifist. He stood for children's rights. And he was gunned down in Guatemala just aimlessly, no real motive, not of robbery, no motive, just gunned down, which is often the case with the children that we have done the portraits of here. They're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe they're working a night shift at a fast food. Maybe they just were stepping out of a car. They haven't been doing anything. They just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I stopped my studio practice as I knew it at the time and started thinking about what could I do. And I thought about portraits, because a portrait to me is a universal symbol of humanity. It's something that we all recognize. It crosses language and cultural barriers. A portrait is, a face is what a baby recognizes a face. And portraits traditionally have been used to honor the kings and the queens and the dignitaries and the presidents. And today, a formal portrait might be done of a banker or a CEO. But so it's a portrait is something that gives dignity and makes a person immortal. It allows us, we remember the Mona Lisa and her smile. We remember the little Afghan girl and her green eyes, or the other portraits that are contained in our universal consciousness. So I wanted to do a portrait, and I wanted to do portrait of children because of their innocence that's being lost and their numbers, and I wanted them to be remembered. And I contacted someone, I just started Googling these children and found someone who had made a memorial to his son and asked if I could do his portrait. And his wife was a legislator, so I kind of stumbled into the responsibility of it, that we made a permission slip, sort of asking that I would have permission by the families to then exhibit these portraits, and that I wouldn't profit from anything that I did with this project, which I think all plays into an important part of the responsibility of the project later, too, of our responsibility to the community and the community of families of victims. So the first one that I did, and these are just a few more, this is Ramel. This is Nick Kapushnik, a pharmacy student that was from Wisconsin. that was killed last year in St. Louis. This is Amon, done by Janie Martin. This is a exhibit I'll get to later. I think I moved ahead. Did I miss one? I missed one. There we go. This is Trey, done by Dan Jabor, who's in our audience here. So I wanted to do the portrait. The original portrait goes to the family, and then these are copies which I put on a handkerchief. And I chose the handkerchief because the floral wreath around it makes me think of a funerary wreath that you would put on a grave. And it also, the handkerchief itself is symbolic of grief, and all of my prior work often had to do with found objects. To me, the handkerchief also is mothering, and it is what can be more horrific than losing a child. So there's a beauty in it, and I think we see a lot of art that shows pain and shows blood and some terror, but I think in the case of the portraits, I wanted to show their beauty. I wanted them to live on, and I wanted them to be remembered. So I'll catch up there a little bit. Our mission statement is very simple. It's first that, to give comfort to the families, to maintain the memory of the child, and then to raise awareness of this national health crisis, which is gun violence. And then out of that, I think, is our responsibility to the community, to the families. We never go ambulance chasing. We never go looking for a family. I've always worked through support agencies, the Crime Victims Advocacy, and Better Family Life, parents of murdered children. We give our information to them, and then the families send a photo to us. We do the copy. We do the portrait. The copy goes on the handkerchief. Our exhibits have been everything from inside a U-Haul, where I took it out on the streets during Cam's open studio days, inside a church, at Christ Church Cathedral through Lent, out on the streets in march and protest of all the children that we've lost to gun violence, at the state capitol, where legislators supposedly had to walk past it, at the Boys and Girls Club in O'Fallon, at the O'Fallon Boys and Girls Club, and in a gallery setting. Oh, I now have a board that joined me, and I know I've run out of time, but I just want to mention them. I couldn't have done this by myself. I was getting very overwhelmed. So Jane Linders joined us, who organizes it and keeps track of all the artists. The generosity of the artists has been amazing. They all volunteer their talents, their materials. So at least we've done about 50 portraits now. Ivan Martin had brought to us this ceremony where we ring a bell and say each child's name with a moment of silence afterwards. Young Bill Burton, standing here with the check shirt on, did our logo of a young face with eyes closed as our new logo of Faces Not Forgotten. So I'll end on that note, and I know we're ready to go on.
Thank you, Christine.
Thanks.
Stephanie? This one, talk to the side.
This one?
Yep.
Okay. So what do we have here? Good evening. So, it's powerful images that you had there, Christine. Thank you. The bulk of my work has been working with young people in many different ways and really finding ways for them to find their voice and be able to make impact in their community. And as I was thinking about all the ways that I've been able to do this work, I was thinking about what has been the fuel for me, the building blocks for me. And part of that work and building blocks for me has been 3 C's, curiosity, creativity, and connectivity. And so I think for me, I really approached this work with so much curiosity. I probably came out of the womb asking why. And now I have a 5-year-old that is I'm getting my paybacks, and she's also asking why. And so together we're asking why about so many things. But, this work and working with young people, asking why, where they come from, what is it like for you to live today, what do you hope for your community, has been central for me to kind of be guided on how we can work together and how we can co-create together. This image here is some work that I was doing in University City that led me to working with Focus St. Louis's youth leadership. And so we had posed the question of how do you use the arts in terms of leadership. And you can't see it right now, but they're building a quilt on a map of St. Louis. And this was last April. And so it's really just very interesting, the stories and the places that they were at that time and what would happen just a few months later. But in terms of that, creativity, in terms of my second building block, I find like this energy when a lot of folks can come together and really kind of solve problems. And there was such an amazing insight on how we could make this community so much a better place. I mean, many of the themes that now the world knows about Ferguson, they were talking about it there. They were talking about why do we have all these divisions? Why do we have so many different divides? Why are we not coming together in so many more ways? And so really looking at ways that they can use the arts to heal us all. And then in terms of connectivity, I, at my core, am always interested in how this person can bring this to the table and this person can bring this to the table. How can we all kind of continue to make not only an amazing image, but how can we also really support each other and find ways to be very creative and trying to break down a lot of the ills of the world. How do we really support each other? This work is really hard, and it's important for us to find ways that when you don't have enough, that someone else can kind of build you up and can connect with you. And so a lot of my work, I find, is really sometimes being that conduit and being able to know, well, this person in the city is doing this, and this person in the other part of the city is doing that. And maybe if you get together, you can really make something else to get to where you need to go and to get to some of the goals that we need. I'm so in awe of community in this work, and I'm always so grateful to be a part of it. I think for me, it's not really about my own artistry. It's about how we continue to kind of build things together. And I look at, for my own child, how I can create a better world for her, and how we can continue to work together and find ways through the arts to be able to change minds in the Jeff City, change minds in the White House, change minds and hearts throughout the world. So the work continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefani.
So I've had the pleasure of being invited to collaborate on a number of projects. And I think the operative word there is invited. As a white man in social work and artistry involved in social movements, I've found myself having the race conversation a lot. And I think initially my sort of educational background wanted to chime in. I studied political science, and I kept wanting to talk about what I thought. And I found myself continually being asked to listen and to reflect and to let people talk and let people's voices be heard. I found myself through invitation working up at the Pink House at the bequest of Dee Nichols, who is not here tonight, but we put together a project that the kids, I'm not sure, were Jaquel and Javante involved in the trash knockout machine? They were asked what was one of the issues that they found with their neighborhood when they walked around, and the sort of overriding one that came back that was doable in the time frame that we wanted to complete it in was litter. And so I don't have any pictures of that, unfortunately, but we ended up building basically a mock-up of the classic sort of arcade basketball game, and built it with the kids. We got to talk a lot about sort of measurements, and there was a lot of sort of creative chaos. And I think a lot of the kids sort of really kind of took ownership of it through the process. And I think that process sort of, that continued presence, I would go up there every Thursday for 2 to 3 hours, and that continued presence sort of helped me get familiar with the kids that would stop by, and familiar with Gina's art practice and sort of community engagement ways. And that allowed further interactions to take place. So we've moved on from there to a project that seeks to bring in some more elements of the community. Basically, the elders in the neighborhood like to play dominoes and chess a lot. And there's a particular gentleman, Mr. Curtis, who's going to be helping us teach the kids how to play chess. But in the process, we've been building these chess tables. Thanks. So in that process, I had these sort of aspirational goals to teach math and basic sort of problem-solving skills and a little bit of chemistry. We're pouring epoxy, and there's doing all these things. And what I realized was that all those goals are great, but ultimately it's the process that engaging with those kids consistently over, a year or a year and a half, that's where the real sort of magic is happening. And we've been doing it successfully, and we've been building these things, and there's some great photos, I think, later on of the slightly more completed projects. But that process, I think, in terms of social engagement and art making, being a facilitator and being a conduit through which these kids can sort of have an idea and then express it and then see it come to life. There are so many whys involved in that process that I can't possibly hope to answer them all, but we sort of come to an understanding without words that I think is pretty interesting and powerful. So one of the other projects I was invited to collaborate on was this mirror casket project. Mallory, who's here now, and a couple other of our friends in cohort had this idea to hold up a mirror, basically, in a very literal sense, to police, to protesters, to everybody, that they may see themselves in the casket. They may see a broken reflection of what the police state is, a mirror in which they can see themselves, their cousins, their neighbors, whoever. And there's a really beautiful moment while we were walking this up to the police department where I actually heard someone ask, like, well, what does it mean? And then another person right next to them said, it could be anybody. It could be us. It could be you. It could be me. And that's really all that I could have ever hoped for to come out of that project. This is up at the police line. Damon Davis was another big collaborator on that, and I'm always very cognizant of my role as a team player here. I was fortunate enough to be the main sort of builder on it, but by no means was I the leader. There was really no leader on this project. We've all taken turns contacting important people, getting it out, moving it to places, preserving it, presenting it, and doing other aspects of it. And I think that social aspect, the sort of decentralized nature of the project really lent itself well to it. And I think in general lends itself well to community work. This is another aspect of my work. I use a lot of reclaimed materials, and I think, again, decentralizing that sort of recycling process. There was a friend of mine who mentioned this sort of biological model. There are consumers, there are producers, and there are basically decomposers in the natural world. And I think in human society, there's very few sort of decomposers as artists and as people who interact in a lot of sort of liminal spaces, these sort of transitional spaces between public and private, between the educational sphere or the sort of underground sort of graffiti aspects. There's a lot of room for decomposing, deconstructing, and reconstructing the way that we see the world. And this is sort of an extension of I'm a carpenter by day, so this is sort of an extension and reconstruction of the kind of work that I do on a daily basis. These are some chess pieces that we built. So again, this is sort of getting into that deconstruction and reconstruction aspect. These are 2x4 scraps that I pulled off of a job site, and I ended up using them to good effect, I think, for these chess pieces. And it's something that's immediately recognizable as not expensive. It's accessible. It's something that it can be tossed around, can be thrown around, can be stepped on, can be painted and repainted and refinished. And I think that sustainability of using things that would have been trash or would have been sort of discarded or thrown by the wayside is important. Yeah, these are the chess pieces as we go on. So these projects in particular, in terms of a social practice, there's a lot of steps that unfortunately can't really, like small hands are not good for. There's a lot of saw cutting, and there's a lot of sort of chemicals that aren't necessarily good to touch a lot. But the aspects that we can play with and have a little bit more fun with are really awesome. And I think it sort of lends some sort of participatory aspect that would not be there otherwise. And I think really it's something that the Community Arts Training Institute kind of drilled into my head, is that I'm working here with people and not for them. This idea that that sort of creative placemaking, and I really liked the change in the sort of placekeeping model, and that we're doing this with them, and then we're going to be participating in this sort of creative experience after we've built this thing with them, teaching them how to play chess, teaching them sort of the parallels between chess and life and strategic thinking and critical thinking. So ultimately, I think, my aspirations for projects like these sort of get thrown by the wayside, and gladly so. I think that ultimately this practice of being with people and doing something creative often has these very high aspirational goals, but there's a really great phrase that keeps coming up. It's basically, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I really think that's probably a good note to end it on. So thank you.
You're up. Here's your little button right there.
Thank you very much, Susan. I've really enjoyed the previous presentations, and I think it gives me a kind of lucky spot to be in, to be coming up last, because certainly the Faces Not Forgotten exhibition I'm very familiar with, because that exhibit is now at the Vaughan Cultural Center, which I am director and curator. The Vaughan Cultural Center is located in the Urban League building, not too far from here. So it's been great working with Christine on that. The introductory photograph that you saw of me, not this one, but the one with the artwork with the baby shoes, was a part of the 250th commemoration of the founding of the city of St. Louis. And that artwork, the baby shoes, multiple baby shoes, situated on a map, multiple maps of the city of St. Louis with a dividing line of Del Mar, basically had to do with where we live, where we're from, and why we're treated the way we are treated based upon where we live. And whose fault is it where we live? Whether or not being born north of Del Mar should be a badge of dishonor, a badge of fear for some people, or should you just accept where a person lives as being their home and not a bad place? There's negatives in every place probably in the world. This photograph is my photograph taken for the apologia to the catalog that you all should have copies of now. This got us to basically looking at the Ferguson situation and the aftermath, and how artists could respond to that particular situation, which we all know about. Hands Up, Don't Shoot, Artists Respond was a collaboration presented by the Alliance of Black Art Galleries, which is an organization that I founded in August of 1913. So it was August 28th, 1913, and less than a year later, we were faced with doing something responsive to Ferguson and basically looking at what artists could do with that. The principles of the galleries are shown there, and the respective logos of the galleries are shown there. I served as curator of that project, which consisted basically of a lot of people doing a lot of great things in a short period of time. There were over 100 artists who participated, and these were artists from all over the country. Basically, I put together a call for artists in late August. The initial due date, I think, was September the 6th. We extended it, and actually, some people came up to us indicating that they had artwork as late as early to mid-October, and the exhibition opened October 17th in 14 different locations in the city and county. The openings were either Friday the 17th or Saturday the 18th of October. All of them opened that weekend, so the opening started on Friday at, I think, 1 o'clock at the Ferguson Municipal Public Library. And shown here is an image from that opening event. Scott Bonner, who has become a rock star, was really, he's the director of the Ferguson Municipal Library. He is probably the first person who, maybe the second, who just said yes right off the bat, I'll be a venue. And I think you've heard a lot about how the Ferguson Municipal Library served as a safe haven for a lot of the children who did not go to school because of some of the unrest in the Ferguson area, that the schools were closed. And Scott was new to the job, so maybe he didn't know to say, well, let me think about it first and ask my board. But when he did speak to the board, they also said yes. And so we had artwork from a number of artists there at the Ferguson Municipal Library that those children, those young people saw every day that they came in, and the regular library patrons saw also. But it was very important to have that venue in particular. We were very fortunate to do that. And shown with me there also is Leonard Hines, who is one of the artists who had work in 3 different venues during that period. He's also a singer-songwriter, so he performed a song at that event as well. As indicated, there were over 100 artists, 14 venues that included, I think you know, SLUMA. It included the Regional Arts Commission, 14th Street Artist Community Gallery, 10th Street Gallery, L.D. Ingram, Exodus Gallery, as well as University of Missouri St. Louis Gallery Fab, the Vaughn Cultural Center. That was before I was director. And Scott Joplin House and the Griot Museum of Black History. Also the Public Library at Central in downtown St. Louis. We had to follow, you know, I'm a taskmaster. I'm a lawyer, so, you know, you can't propose doing something like this unless you maintain a fairly rigid schedule. But I also had to have flexibility in terms of how things went along. But I basically set out a plan, a planning document from the beginning to the closing exhibition on December 20th, and we basically stuck to it. And I'm very proud of that. Some of my colleagues said, oh, well, you're going so fast. Oh, you're sending out all these emails. And I read emails. And 9 times out of 10, if I'm sending you an email, it's something that's very important. So we basically stuck to that schedule. This is the artwork that I did for Hands Up, Don't Shoot, Artists Respond. And this is titled Mourning in America, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, Mourning in America. And it's basically done as a tribute to the mothers of mostly sons who have died by whatever means, because when you're a mother and you lose someone, you lose someone. And so one of the things, I think the phrase that was given from Mr. Lowe was, art is where the archiving happens. So I wanted to make sure that we had a clear artistic documentation of what had happened with respect to Ferguson. Since the exhibit closed, we have had a number of opportunities to talk about it. In March, we had a program at the Missouri History Museum that dealt with archiving everything related to Ferguson, particularly the art, and how we are documenting history with that, in that regard. We also were fortunate, 2 of the galleries collaborated, Salon 53 and 10th Street Gallery collaborated to exhibit, while art was on exhibit, to present Duo Noir, which is a guitar group, and they performed and did their debut piece on Ferguson, titled Beyond Ferguson, at our venue. So we were asked to do that. That was very exciting, and be happy to talk to you more about Hands Up, Don't Shoot, or how we did it, and enjoy the catalog. Thank you.
I didn't really hear anybody talk about Rick Lowe's revolution thing, where revolution is sustained empowerment of people who are powerless. I know from working with Gina Martinez over there, who I co-teach with sometimes, that we have a lot of discussions about that word power, that pesky word power. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. Are your mics on now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so let's start with a little bit of discussion, and then we'll get to audience questions. So let's go to the when we enter and exit communities, and just talk a little bit about ethics, going off of what Marcus said about feeling like you need an invitation. Because I'm wondering about this, because in the Ferguson context of St. Louis now, and Frida and I were saying that we're coming up to the 1-year anniversary in August when I was at Open Engagement, I told her I was surprised how many people told me that they were coming to St. Louis for the anniversary. And I'm like thinking, oh no. I'm thinking, oh no, are we going to get inundated? Like, why are you coming? Why do you want to come? So they're inviting themselves. So how do you enter and exit ethically? And we'll have everybody talk a little bit about it.
You want to start with me?
Sure.
That's a big question. I think, in my experience, I've entered into this work through a primary source, basically someone who has been involved with the community that saw a need or saw a place where my skills might be useful. And what I've tried to do in my work anyways has been to approach everybody with as much respect as I can possibly bring to the table, because ultimately any relationship is built on respect, and not trying to impose whatever your beliefs are on that situation. So being open-minded, being friendly, being as receptive to whatever may come in that event, in that space, in that moment, I think is, for me, the best way to enter that kind of situation.
Okay. Christine?
With our project, we only do portraits by invitation, by the family sending us a form saying, and we felt that was really important because there's a time immediately after someone loses a child, we rarely do a portrait immediately after someone loses a child. They need that time, that space to process. Maybe within a few months, up to a year, we might get a portrait. Sometimes it's years later. But I feel that we have to respect the family's privacy. The family has to want to be a part of the project and be okay with the portrait of their child being on exhibit continuously. We are sometimes in the community and meet family members. Ivan and Janie live within a community, William and Bill. Actually, I have run into people too, where you find yourself in a situation where there are family members that are the families of victims. And then we have on hand, I carry with me our forms and hand them out if I get asked about it. But I don't go looking for them. It's important to work through those social service agencies by invitation. That's the invitation that we get, is through Crime Victims Advocacy or parents of murdered children, or by word of mouth that people find out about us.
It's a great model that you developed. Oh, it's echoey. Stephanie?
I think for me, the core is building relationships, and I don't think that if you go into community without having an invitation, you can really build relationships. You can't just pot yourself down and be able to be the savior, or to be able to come into a place. Again, I take it very seriously and want to honor what community that I'm a part of, and more of my work in terms of like social service, I've seen the heartache and the pain of going into communities and leaving communities and starting projects and then ending them without really seeing the true effects of that.
Lack of funding or changing jobs.
Changing jobs, funding, all those things I think have an impact. And again, for me, it's in terms of ethically, I've really looked back on some of those communities with some regret and some pain, and that you know, we started something but didn't finish it and didn't honor the people of those communities.
But maybe they were able to finish on their own.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
I mean, it's interesting
Uh-huh.
because there's different models. So some artists work as project artists, and they maybe aren't even invited by that community, but maybe they're invited by a museum to create a work in a community, like Alfredo Yar, I'm thinking of, invited into Montreal to create a work, and he went there and had to figure out what he wanted to do and spent a lot of time meeting people before he ever conceived of his project. And then some people, like Rick Lowe, bought buildings and has stayed there for over 20 years in one spot. There's really different models. Frida, would you like to add?
Well, the work, is this on? Yeah. The work that I do and have been engaged in hasn't really raised the kinds of ethical issues that I think are prevalent with my colleagues here. However, I tend to be fairly aggressive, but with, I guess, the Southern charm and with a cultured kind of ask in terms of what I want to do. For example, and this goes to editing one's plans, even though you have this great document as to the step-by-steps. Originally, my view was to have 18 different venues for Hands Up, Don't Shoot. One venue for each year of Michael Brown's life, and that was in the call for artists, that was in the original press release. But we had 14 venues, and that's because we were, turned down by some, and at a certain point, chasing a venue becomes unimportant to get to 18. That was never so critical to the impact of the project. For example, we had a bank in Ferguson that initially the woman said yes, was showing us space and talking to us, but had to run it up the chain or something, and the answer came back no. And I think it was out of their own fear. And I suspect they regretted not being a part of Hands Up, Don't Shoot, because I continued to keep them informed of everything that was happening and sending them all of the media that resulted from it.
Can I take this mic out of this thing? Yes? Okay.
Susan, if I may, I would like to say, on the note of sort of failure in that process, the one sort of community project that I've been involved with that I didn't feel like we were invited to ended up sort of collapsing in a lot of miscommunication and sort of fogginess. So I think, if there's any lesson to be gained from whether or not you are invited or not, it's that upfront honesty from the start. If you don't feel like you're invited, even if you are, if you don't have those conversations at the beginning, it leaves you on shaky ground for the rest of the project.
So let's open up to questions so we can have some discussion with the panel. And I'll bring you the mic.
So my question is coming out of what Frida told us about art, or quoted about art is where the archiving happens. And I'm wondering what kind of responsibility you on this panel feel toward your collaborators when it comes to the archiving, the story that's told later. I've witnessed events where people were clearly invited into the community, clearly engaged with the community in a very respectful, honoring way, but then the legacy of that art project is that the collaborators within the community are unnamed, and they're never named, and they become, they disappear into the ether. So in the moment, during the practice, there's something really beautiful that's happening, but then part of that, the story wasn't finished, we didn't bring it to a close, seems to me to be in the telling of the tale of what happened then. And I wonder, as someone who writes about the art show, what what responsibility we have to the children, to the schools, to lift them up and make them the active partners.
Well, let me comment briefly with respect to the project I was engaged in. We, in addition to the catalog, which clearly documents the venues, as well as the over 100 artists who were participating, we also produced a video, a 24-minute video that shows all of the art. The catalog contains, as you can see, just some of the artwork, but the video, which is available on YouTube, you can Google it and get to it, and it contains all of the artwork, the names and the hometowns or the locations of each of the artists. Additionally, as I said, we did the program at the History Museum on archiving. Washington University identified itself as the repository, the digital repository for all things Ferguson. And one of the principles of that institution was a part of our March 8th program at the History Museum, and everything is there. Everything related to text messages, emails, if it mentions Ferguson, if it's in some public domain, it's in the repository at Washington University. So you can imagine I'm not a techie, but the gigabytes or the millibytes or whatever kind of bytes or bits of storage that they have, everything that's needed to do that. And so that's how we do it. And we continue to identify and invite those, particularly the venues. Interestingly, also, the St. Louis University Museum of Art asked artists if they would be willing to donate artwork to their museum, and several artists have. Artists have also donated, I believe, to the History Museum, and maybe one other institution has asked.
Yeah, the Smithsonian.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you're empowering the artists that were in the exhibition?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because they've done something very important, something a lot of the artists were already working on even before I issued the call for artists. And it's something that, we've had continual communications about. Some of the artists have been documented on, in addition to the catalog, we did a major poster, not the one that was shown here, but another poster that showed 3 of the artists' works. There have been countless newspaper articles. Some of the artists have been interviewed by the BBC, who was very much on site during a lot of the Ferguson protests in the early months, and other kinds of interviews. So yeah, I feel that the artists have been presented well and have benefited from it. This is something they wanted to do, and they feel a great part of it.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I was just going to answer that one in a minute, too, that we always have the name of every artist that has done a portrait on the back of every portrait and is listed in every exhibit that we do. And when we read the name of the child, we also usually read the name of the artist that did the portrait.
First, you're all great, and I wanted to ask or provoke this question about power and in relationship to Rick Lowe's idea about how to leverage the art world in relationship to the wealth he's talking about and the power. I mean, how do you see yourselves in relationship to the actual aspect of art making and how you think about how you can leverage the art world?
If I may. There was a moment a few months ago now when we were approached by the Smithsonian about acquiring the mirror casket. And we, at first, we're thrilled, obviously. It's an enormous institution. It's an honor to be even associated with it. But we quickly realized that the Smithsonian is an enormous institution that has dozens of museums. And they were asking us to donate a very important piece of this movement. And we started, saying, well, why are they asking us to donate this when clearly there's millions and millions of dollars behind this institution? And I'm not entirely sure where the process is at the moment, but we've gone anywhere from, discussing selling it to a private bidder and having them donate it as a way to leverage some of the resources and money in the art world that could then be funneled back into aspects of the movement. And there were plans, many, many, many plans for that money to be used. And I think if something like that were to be successful, it would be entirely based upon leveraging some sort of private money. Unfortunately, there's not the infrastructure to bring public money into it. And it's my understanding that the Smithsonian may be interested in purchasing it, but probably not for an asking price that we could get from a private collector. So I think there is we were very aware of it after we made it and after we saw its impact, the value that it had. I think in the process of making it, it's something that, as an artist, you're just responding to what is needed in the moment or what the plan was, and sort of following that blueprint and just sort of going with it. But as soon as it's made, I think a lot of times the meaning that is impregnated upon a work of art doesn't happen in the process. It happens after, in the reaction to it and in that participation. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good question. Would you show it in a gallery or a museum?
It's traveled throughout the state. I think maybe a dozen or so galleries. And should it end up in the Smithsonian free, I would be thrilled as well. I think it's the best place for it to be archived, and it will certainly be taken care of there.
I read that they are acquiring some of the poster art.
Yep, my friend Damon donated a large wheat paste to the Hands Up.
So this leads me to a question to follow up Carmen. So Frida, do you know of any kind of movement happening as far as the national Black Lives Matter movement, as far as a larger exhibition, any museums, any kind of talk that way where artists are being asked to respond to what's been happening in many, many cities, not just St. Louis?
Well, I know that a lot of artists and artists who are extremely well-known and who can command lucrative sums for their art have been creating art along the lines of Black Lives Matter or Hands Up, Don't Shoot or whatever. In our case, most of the art was for sale. Some of it did sell, and artists retained ownership of their work, so they are free to make multiples of it if they so choose. But there was a question as to museums and other places asking for donated art and why wouldn't they buy the art. But that was totally up to the artists. I didn't get involved in that conversation. None of them asked for my work, but actually there was a buyer. There was someone who wanted to buy my art, Morning in America, and it was not for sale. It's not for sale. But artists choose to do what they want to do. The institution certainly will take care of the art. There's a question of where it will go, when it might be seen again in daylight. As with every museum location in particular, they can't have everything on exhibit all the time. But I think that for those artists who did donate their work, I think it's a good thing because there's a bit of pride I think, in that as well.
In archiving. Is there any questions in the back?
I think we had a question up top here.
Yeah, I'm with the Faces Not Forgotten Project. I'm Ivan Martin, and I want to thank everyone that's here this evening. I noticed I've been working with the project for about a year, and I noticed as I worked more with the project and was out in the community more, dealing with some of the families that were suffering with the losses, that our project didn't include any of the young people shot by police. So I asked our primary collaborator why that was, and somehow there's somewhat of a conflict with that, with funding or policies of that nature. So when you...
I can answer that if you want, Ivan. The Crime Victims Advocacy Center, the CVA that we usually give our information to give to families, is funded by United Way, and one of their policies is they are not allowed to work with victims that were perpetrators. So that's where...
Or perceived perpetrators.
Yeah. Right.
And I guess,
But as you are out there in the community now handing things out, you're free to hand it out to anyone that you know who is a family member who has had a loss. It's not
Well,
specific to that. It's just we won't receive them through Crime Victims Advocacy. And
but I'm saying, you know, as we're
It's
here
not-
this evening talking about the social justice and art, the issue of that kind of thing, not only are we not being able to reach out to those families in the normal means that we usually are, but as the artist, you know, there's somewhat of a repression type of effect on the artist.
There was a piece done in St. Louis called Chalked Unarmed by Mike Pagano and Deandra Nicole, and I think some other artists were involved. It's a video piece. You were involved in that? Who? Oh, why don't you tell about that? You want to talk about it a little bit?
Yes. Nine Network did a video on it. It was not a video piece. It's a chalk piece. It's part performance and part chalk drawing. So I guess it's we ask people to find a partner. Someone lies down on the ground, you chalk them, and we have a list of names of. It started out as black men that have been killed extrajudicially by the police, unarmed, and that has grown to include women. And we leave them around public spaces, started in St. Louis, and it's spread around the country. Yes.
there was actually a woman who was doing that, Art is Ammo, originally, too, same idea. And yeah, doing it as a performance first, and then chalking around the body with the idea that movement is a better change of habit, so of how we would look at a chalk drawing. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and it actually, what you're saying about the importance of like honoring and the name is woven into what kind of motivated that project too.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how much did the video that the Nine Network did on your project, how much did that influence it spreading to a national project?
I have no idea. The video, Mike was just there the day we started it, and he had his camera, so it just was organic. The project itself is a hashtag, so we intentionally spread it through social media using the hashtag, so I think that probably had the most effect. And then, you know, tons of press was just filtering into Ferguson at the time, so people pick it up.
Thank you, good question. How are we doing on time, BJ? 9:15, so one more question? One more question, is there one? Yes.
So I was actually at the Open Engagement Conference that you're speaking about as well, and to be completely honest with you, I was a bit frustrated with the conference as a whole because I feel like it was on place and revolution, and it was exactly not revolutionary. Not that it was missing at every piece, but I think that there was a real it seemed like there was not a willingness to be as bold as it requires to really pursue what revolution is and make something happen. So whenever I think about socially engaged art, whenever I think about what it is to run an alternative arts organization like my husband and I do, or to be an artist in social practice, I think about the goal of the work. What is the goal? Is the goal for the community? So if we say that it's for the community, they might not like it. It might be something they need to hear. So is it for the community whether they like it or not? And how would you guys respond to that? I mean, honestly, I think within the movement in Ferguson, I know that I have been part of, and I know that anybody who has been involved in this at all have been part of some pretty heated conversations. And I think that I really liked this quote that I read that said, "New ideas bring an end to consensus." And it's true. When we're bringing these new thoughts or these challenges to a system, everyone's not going to just agree because it's a change of pace. So what does that look like? And what is, you talked a bit about power, and we've talked about support and maybe trying to end patronage and not rely on that so that you can have this sort of freedom of voice. And something that I've liked a lot as I meditate on it myself is like, how do you maintain your voice as an artist? How do you maintain this sort of moral compass in the midst of all of these pressures to say or to not say something? And the saying, like, you can teach a man to fish rather than feed him. And I think that honestly, we're teaching ourselves to fish. So anyway, sorry. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about that.
What's the name of your organization that you run? Luminary. Oh, okay, awesome. I know that place.
I'll start briefly on that. For Hands Up, Don't Shoot, I just started it, zero money except my own and what at least one of my colleagues contributed. The video was done by one of our gallery owners, Annetta Vickers-Bentile, so that was her contribution to it. The catalog really costs money, of course, and there was a generous benefactor who offered to pay for that, and he did. Otherwise, everything was strictly out of pocket, so I think you're right. We didn't have anybody to answer to, and I don't know that if anyone would have said, well, maybe you shouldn't put that in the catalog, I would have listened to them. That would have, here, take your money back, because certain things, you can't be restricted by money in terms of what someone may have donated for a project to go forward. So that's a little different. Didn't have any money going out, starting it, didn't have any money at the end.
Well, and in terms of revolution, I think we're going to have to get to a place where dissent can happen and we can live through it, and that we can come together through it, and until we're able to be able to disagree in a way that's very authentic and true, but still be able to move forward is when true revolution can happen. And we're not there yet, but it's my hope, and I think through a lot of the work that people are doing now, I think we're in a place where it's happening, that those arguments that you're saying, that we're really going to be able to get to a different place. So
I think there's power in numbers. It was a huge exhibit of the Hands Up, 14 venues and all over the city. Something I hope that as we keep doing more and more and more portraits, I hope we don't do 28,000, but if we did, the volume of that, of what that would be, when in history, like with the AIDS quilt, it was the immensity of it in the mall, and I think we are totally volunteer aside from the critical mass grant that we received, but we've all put into it our own money everything's been donated, the painting, the materials, the canvases, the handkerchiefs, everything. So I took it out with no restrictions. There's nobody I answer to with it except the families. And to me, I have a big personal responsibility to the families. I don't want to re-traumatize my families. I feel like they've already been the population that's been neglected and ignored, and no one does recognize their suffering. So I don't want to put them through anything more again. So we made a difficult decision to not take the quilt to Ferguson in the middle of things, because our families, we talked with crime victims advocacy and everything else, our families had not received, many of them have not even received any justice for their losses. Though if we were invited now, it might be different, and it depends. And it was related, yet that was the decision we had to make on that one. We work hard to make a community for the families so that each event they're invited to, they come and they visit the portrait, and they often take in a picture of themselves with the portrait. So it's created a community for the families.
Yeah, I think in terms of revolution, I think that the further decentralization of systems of power, like a lot of the mirror casket, for example, was built out of pocket, but we attached a high value to it, and I think that much like we were saying in terms of powers, the power of numbers. We were thinking if we could sell it, we would use it to build one for every high-profile police killing that had happened since August 9th, and then on the anniversary, come with a fleet of them. And I think that, the actions where, tens of thousands of people gather unannounced, the Arab Spring was an incredible moment where 15 million people were in the street, completely decentralized. There was no hierarchy that caused that to happen. And now we're talking about the Black Spring, and I think that that's something that, seems somewhat contrived in the light of historical things with Arab Spring. But I think it can have power and relevance if this decentralized model is not one that stays on Twitter or stays, in hashtag form, as useful as it is in spreading the word. Ultimately, it's about people gathering in large numbers, and I think something that the United States has an issue with in that regard is that geographically we are just massively spread out. Whereas in a place like Egypt or Europe, you can come to any major cultural capital within 5 hours. If we wanted to have a gathering in St. Louis, people would be, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars collectively to get here. And then what is that revolution? It's a revolution of the people who are privileged enough to travel here. And I think that that's something that, I don't have an answer for at all, but it's something that, as Americans, we have a unique problem to face in our geographic sort of sparse nature. Sparsity, is that a word? I don't know. Density, the opposite of density. And I think that, further decentralization as a trend will lend itself well to that, but it needs to be embedded in structures that are sustainable. So I like the idea of losing patronage in some way, but I mean, my project up at the Pink House subsisted off of 2 RAC grants, and RAC is a great organization, but it's impossible to keep asking people for money in order to fund a revolution.
Back to social enterprise then. Well, thank you so much to our panel. Thank you for sharing all of your thoughts and your artwork with us. And thank you, audience, for attending tonight. I think that what we do have in America is technology, which kind of shrinks geography, hopefully. Hopefully we've added to the revolution that's already started. And St. Louis is right smack dab in the middle of the United States, so we're poised perfectly geographically to spread the word. And we have wonderful young people working hard and leading the way. And now that we know the building blocks, or at least a few of them, I think we can see that we have just so much talent in St. Louis and so much talent even in this room that we should be okay. We're just going to keep on marching. So thanks for coming, and I hope you'll stay. And are there beverages or? There's a bar, so there's a bar. We can continue the conversation until they kick us out. Thank you.
Right down the road.
Thank you.
And before you leave, I would say thank you to Susan and our panelists for coming and giving their time tonight to talk about this topic. So thank you very much.